Je te vois. Oui, je te vois assez bien.
Ah,
Avez-vous vu le message de conseiller Darouz? Il va peut-être
oui,
être un petit peu en retard. OK,
oui, je l'ai vu.
c'est beau.
Merci.
Merci. OK.
Good morning. Can anyone please confirm if they can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Ms. Gorenstein.
Good morning, Chair.
There we go. That's down now. Carol, could you confirm still no delegations for this morning?
No delegations, Mr. Chair, and we are live.
Thank you. And media availability 15 minutes, right?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Teresa, good morning. You've been in touch with Councillor Dudas, right? Excellent.
Good morning.
Good morning. Bon matin.
Bon matin.
Il fait très beau ce matin.
Un peu froid.
Un peu, mais c'est pas si pire.
J'ai besoin des gants ce matin.
Mm. Do you get out in the morning, Teresa?
Every morning.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah.
I walked 5,000 or so steps in already, so
Good stuff.
gets things going.
I do what I call my fake commute. I go for a bike ride through the ward and then come.
Nice.
So I pretend like I've commuted.
So true. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. We'll be starting in about 1 minute. Well, good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Carol, does it look like we have quorum?
We do have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then let's begin. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting conducted by virtual means, again, through Zoom. Just a reminder to keep everyone's microphone muted until I call on you to speak. If at any point you want to speak, as usual, you know it by now, use the raise hand Zoom function, and you know where to find it near the audio controls. Our committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues, and the usual 5-minute speaking limit will apply. We have no public delegations signed up for the agenda items today. However, members of the public are certainly welcome to provide written comments, which will be circulated to members of the council. I'll remind you that this meeting is being live streamed and will be archived to YouTube. And so before we proceed, can we do a quick formal roll call, Madam Coordinator?
Councillor El Shantiri,
Present.
Councillor Darouz, I don't believe he's in attendance just yet. He did say he was going to be late. Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Vice Chair Meehan.
Here.
And Président Cloutier.
Présent.
Vous avez quorum.
Merci. If you could advise us when Councillor Darouz does arrive, would appreciate it. So good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Quay. I certainly want to begin the meeting by acknowledging that wherever we are logging in from, if we are within Ottawa, we are sitting on an unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. No matter where we're logging in from, it's important to research the traditional territory you're in and the history of the land and its original peoples. Also important to recognize the upcoming National Day for Truth and Reconciliation this Thursday, September 30th. Le 30 septembre marquera la toute première journée nationale de la vérité et de la réconciliation. La commémoration publique de l'histoire tragique et douloureuse des pensionnats et de leurs séquelles durables est un élément essentiel du processus de réconciliation. It is a day to honor First Nation, Métis, and Inuit survivors, their communities and their families, and to build awareness of the history and the effects and the legacy of the Indian residential school system, and to advance reconciliation on the land known as Turtle Island or Canada. If, like me, you're looking for ways to educate yourself and others or to get involved, please visit ottawa.ca or the Ottawa Public Library website for resources and events in Ottawa over the week. Thursday coincides with Orange Shirt Day, a day to commemorate Indigenous children who survived the Indian residential school system and those who did not. C'est une occasion de rendre hommage aux enfants disparus et aux survivants des pensionnats, leurs familles et leurs communautés. It's wonderful to see more orange Every Child Matters shirts every year worn in public and displayed at people's homes. I encourage everyone to visit the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation online for ongoing online events and to review the Truth and Reconciliation Committee's 94 calls to action and the progress made or not made on those calls, and to read treaties because we are all people of treaties. If you find information you're discovering or the idea of attending events a little bit overwhelming, but are still compelled to do something, consider, if you can, making a donation to the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. And I appreciate all committee members, all participants, thoughtful reflection on these issues, and thank you for listening. I'm happy you're all able to join us today for this morning's Audit Committee meeting. L'ordre du jour est assez court, avec seulement 3 points à l'ordre du jour à aborder aujourd'hui. And with the committee's concurrence, our first item will be the Quality Assurance Review report, which will include a presentation by our Auditor General, Nathalie Bouchon, la vérificatrice générale, et Deloitte pourront répondre aux questions après la présentation. And we'll have Daleen Kells, the partner from Deloitte. We'll receive a report on the Fleet Services audit. It will include a presentation by Deputy Auditor General Ed Minor. And again, we will take questions for the Deputy Auditor General and staff following the presentation. And I'll let you know who staff are who are present. Et enfin, nous allons recevoir le premier rapport semestriel sur les procédures du suivi du Bureau de la vérificatrice générale. And this will feature a presentation from our new Deputy Auditor General, Joanne Gorenstein. This will be the Deputy AG Gorenstein's first presentation to the committee, so I'd like to take a minute to welcome her to her role. The Deputy Auditor General comes to the city with over 20 years experience, and during her recent work at PwC Canada in the National Capital Region, Ms. Gorenstein managed the internal audit and risk management practices. In this role, she provided audit and advisory services to various public sector organization. Welcome, Ms. Gorenstein, to the City of Ottawa. We appreciate your service to the residents of the city.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing, hearing none, the minutes from the May 25th meeting, are they confirmed? Confirmed, yes.
Confirmed.
Thank you. And as I said, we have no public delegations, but presentations for all 3 items. So let's proceed with the first item of the agenda. Number 1, the Office of the Auditor General Quality Assurance Review. There will be a presentation by the Auditor General. And as I said, Damien Kells, partner from Deloitte, is in attendance to respond for questions. So, Madame la vérificatrice générale, vous pouvez procéder quand vous allez être prête.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président et membres du comité. Carole, si je peux te demander de partager la présentation, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup. This morning, I would like to walk you through the results of our Quality Assurance Review, or as I like to refer to it, the Audit of the Auditors. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. The Institute of Internal Auditors International Standards for the Professional Practice of Internal Auditing requires that an external assessment of an audit function be performed at least once every 5 years by a qualified independent assessor from outside of the organization. The last external assessment of the office was conducted in 2011 and reported to the Audit Subcommittee in 2012. In May of this year, Council approved the OEG's proposed approach and timeline for our office to conduct a self-assessment and contract Deloitte to perform an independent validation. Les normes internationales pour la pratique professionnelle de l'audit interne de l'Institut des auditeurs internes obligent à mener l'évaluation externe des fonctions de vérification au moins une fois à tous les 5 ans en faisant appel à un évaluateur indépendant et compétent à l'extérieur de l'organisme. La dernière évaluation externe du bureau remonte à 2011 et a fait l'objet d'un rapport au sous-comité de la vérification en 2012. En mai de cette année, le Conseil a approuvé l'approche et le calendrier proposés par le BVG pour mener une auto-évaluation et pour confier à Deloitte un contrat de validation indépendant. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. The objectives of this exercise were to assess the OEG's conformance with the Institute of Internal Auditor Standards and the Institute of Internal Auditors Code of Ethics, It was also meant to identify successful audit practices employed by the office and opportunities for continuous improvement. The scope of the assessment was audit activities during a 5-year period from June 1st, 2016 to May 31st, 2021. Les objectifs de ce travail consistaient, premièrement, à évaluer la conformité du BVG aux normes de l'Institut des auditeurs internes et au code de déontologie de l'Institut des auditeurs internes, ainsi qu'à recenser les pratiques de vérification productive appliquées par le BVG et les points d'amélioration continue. L'évaluation a porté sur les activités d'audit comprises dans la période de 5 ans entre le 1er juin 2016 et le 31 mai 2021. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. The OAG began the process by conducting and documenting a self-assessment of our audit processes earlier this year. Deloitte then validated the results of our office's self-assessment by conducting interviews with key stakeholders, evaluating information prepared by our office, and reviewing a sample of audit files. Deloitte prepared an independent validation statement to document its conclusions. You can find this statement in Appendix 3 of the report. It is their overall opinion that the OAG generally conforms with the standards and the Institute of Internal Auditors Code of Ethics. Generally conforms is the most positive term used in these assessments. It means that an audit function has a charter, policies, and processes that are judged to be in conformance with the standards and the Code of Ethics. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. Although the OAG generally conforms with the Institute of Internal Auditors standards and the Institute of Internal Auditors Code of Ethics, there were some gaps to conformance that were identified in the review. The OAG has developed a quality assurance and improvement program. However, it has not been fully implemented. Until early this year, the quality assurance and improvement program was rarely discussed with the audit committee. This, coupled with minimal reporting, limited the committee's oversight of the program. Furthermore, the last external assessment of the office was performed in 2011, though the standards require one to be conducted every 5 years. We will report to the audit committee concerning the quality assurance and improvement program as part of our annual report going forward. We will also work with the chair of the audit committee to ensure the next external assessment is conducted and reported back to the audit committee by end of 2026. Secondly, the standards require that the Auditor General periodically report to Council on a number of items. While the most recent reporting to Audit Committee in the spring of 2021 covered many of these key areas, previous reporting during the 5-year period under review did not cover all of the required items. We are committed to continuing our recent practices of reporting on the items required by the standards. The OAG develops and documents work programs for each audit, and they are reviewed prior to implementation. However, final approval of these work programs was not consistently documented. Earlier this year, we implemented a process for electronic sign-off by myself, the Auditor General, on all key elements of the audit process to ensure that documentation supporting approvals was retained. We concur with these gaps to conformance and have developed action plans to address them. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. In addition to the gaps discussed in the previous slide, we identified opportunities for continuous improvement as part of our self-assessment. We have also developed corresponding action plans for each item. The first item I'd like to discuss is our Audit Charter. The OAG's Audit Charter was initially approved by Council earlier this year. As such, the opportunity to review and update it has yet to arise. To ensure that the Charter remains current, it will be reviewed and updated on an annual basis. The next version will be brought to the Audit Committee next year. The standards require audit functions to evaluate the effectiveness of organizations' risk management processes and contribute to their improvement. While some risk management processes have been evaluated through OAG engagements, other processes, such as the capture and communication of risk information across the organization, were not assessed during the period under review. As highlighted in our 2021 interim audit work plan, we had identified an audit of the city's integrated risk management as a consideration for 2022. We will ensure this audit is included in our upcoming work plan, which will be presented to the Audit Committee later this fall. While the OAG staff consider the probability of fraud when developing audit objectives, the assessment of fraud risk was not formally documented in our audit files. Earlier this year, we modified our process to ensure appropriate consideration and documentation of fraud risk was maintained on file. Lastly, timely communication was an additional item we noted for improvement. As you are aware, earlier this year, we began reporting on audits as they are complete. We have also altered our follow-up process to provide timely updates on management's progress. We will continue with these practices to ensure timely communication to committee and council. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. Thank you very much. This concludes my presentation. I would welcome members from Deloitte to add any further comments they may have, at which time we would then welcome any questions you have of our office or of Deloitte. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Natalie.
Madam Auditor General. So yes, Ms. Kells, please.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the summary is very succinct and does provide an overview of the areas that we identified where there are gaps, and the other items that were noted as ways that they could continue to improve their practices. If I could also add that there were some successful practices that were not highlighted in this recent report, but are in the written report. And I think it is worth noting because when we did the review, it was for a 5-year period. And so certainly we were able to see a transition, whether it was in the working papers themselves or even the collaboration that was happening with the rest of the operations. And I need to commend the existing internal audit function for the delivery and the collaboration with the other areas, because it is perceived that they are adding value. They're following up, they're very independent, they're focused on the right areas of the operations, and that is critical because you want to get value out of your internal audit function. So while the standards were assessed around conformance, there are also some other hidden gems or values that I just wanted to make sure are highlighted to the committee as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your presentation and for your comments. There are a few questions. Vice Chair Meehan, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just 2 questions. I'm just wondering why it was 10 years before we did a quality assurance. Madam Auditor General, do you happen to know the reason why?
Chair, unfortunately, I cannot speak to what was or was not done prior to my arrival.
So okay, I guess that's fair. Thank you. The second question is when we talked about some gaps in the procedures over the course of that 5-year period, and I understand that Ms. Kell said that there were some gems, and I appreciate that. Were there any of the gaps? Could they have compromised the quality of the audits that were conducted?
Chair, thank you very much for your question, Vice Chair. Very good question. I do not believe so. I think we have many steps in place to ensure that the overall quality of our audit files and the results of our reports are assured. The key steps such as overall review is there, and that's really what helps us sustain overall quality. But I'd also ask our representative from Deloitte whether or not she'd like to add any other further comments to that.
Certainly, I'll just comment that there was a high level of supervision that we could see within the files and also prompt follow-up as well. So there weren't quality issues from that regard, that certain items may fall through the cracks or not be detected or at least reported on. So those things were consistently being delivered. It was other evidence that for conforming with the standards themselves that were already reported on and noted that were the weaknesses, not necessarily the quality of the audits themselves.
Can you just tell me what that means?
So for example, if they're not evidencing that the fraud questions, for example, so even though we were able to corroborate that they were considering fraud, because that's something that needs to be considered as part of each of their engagements as to whether or not there are occurrences, we weren't necessarily seeing that consistently in the files that were sampled, that was being evidenced that that was actually occurring. So even though we were able to corroborate it amongst people, so that's why you would see some of those things being noted, that they need to improve on that and to ensure that it's documented in their procedures and also evidenced in their working paper files as well too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Auditor General and Ms. Kels. I appreciate all the work you've done. A similar question to what Vice Chair Meehan was asking, with the gap, I wonder if it made it harder to pick up the threads when a previous one hadn't been done for 10 years. Did that make it more difficult that there was that gap, that there wasn't anything done in 2016?
Chair, I think I can start to answer that question, and then again, if Ms. Kells would like to add. I think it's always advantageous for us to continue to do external assessments every 5 years, not solely to be in conformance, but it does help us keep a pulse on how we're doing. As part of the Institute of Internal Auditor Standards, we're also required to do internal assessments. So I kind of refer to them as almost like a mini external assessment, where we look at how we are complying and we do a quick self-assessment, whether it be on a file or two throughout the year or just reviewing our current practices. So I do think it's advantageous if we do ensure that they are done every 5 years. It also, I think, provides to you as members of the committee assurance as to how we are conducting and our work.
Yeah, I can't expect you to answer about what happened 5 years ago, of course, but I do wonder if a ball was dropped there. But I appreciate. I just wanted to see if it complicated your situation, being as there wasn't one done 5 years ago. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing no other questions from other members of the committee. And so certainly, Madam Auditor General, thank you for the initiative and the independent validation by Deloitte to fill that gap, so that we are, of course, in compliance and, of course, providing the assurance that the audits that are done are complete, are thorough, and compliant with all the standards. And thank you, Madam Auditor General. Let me take this opportunity to, the charter, the change in processes, the initiatives that you've brought forth, and you and I have exchanged a lot. Merci énormément de vos initiatives. Thank you for all those initiatives.
Yes.
So seeing no other questions, that the Audit Committee recommend that Council receive the Quality Assurance Review Report with independent validation. Is that item carried?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you.
Received.
Thank you very much. We are on to item number 2. The Office of the Auditor General report on the Fleet Services Audit. And we have a presentation from Deputy Auditor General Ed Minor, and staff will be present. Yan Saint-Louis, Director of Fleet Services, is present, and Jim Greer, Director of Transit Operations, will be present. And so, Mr. Minor, if you, whenever you're ready.
Carole, si tu peux partager la présentation, s'il vous plaît, je vais faire un bref introduction. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité. Nous aimerions maintenant discuter notre rapport sur les services du parc automobile. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. Mes collègues et moi souhaitons exprimer notre reconnaissance au directeur municipal, à la direction et au personnel pour leur collaboration soutenue et leur aide constante pendant la vérification. J'aimerais aussi remercier les membres de mon équipe pour leur travail exceptionnel. J'aimerais maintenant passer la parole à Deputy Auditor General Ed Minor.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, Councillors. I'd like to start off On the next slide, please. Yeah, so I'd like to start off by providing some background on fleet services. The fleet services functions are carried out by the Municipal Fleet Services Group within the Innovative Client Services Department and by the Fleet and Facilities Maintenance Branch within OC Transpo. The Municipal Fleet Services Group supports all city departments as well as some city boards and utilities. They procure, maintain, administer, repair, and replace the city's fleet. This consists of roughly 5,000 non-revenue vehicles, pieces of equipment, and components. The group operates under a shared services model. So under this model, it charges back most of its cost back to other departments. For example, in 2019, nearly $85 million was charged back out of the $89 million that was spent. It delivers its services through 9 garages, which are located throughout the city. And each year, the Fleet Services Group prepares draft operating and capital budgets. These budgets include replacements, where an old vehicle is being replaced by a new one, as well as growth expenditures for net new vehicles. These budgets are approved by council as part of the annual budget process. The Fleet and Facilities Maintenance Branch within OC Transpo is responsible for a diverse fleet of roughly 1,300 vehicles. These units are made up of close to 1,000 buses of various models, as well as non-revenue vehicles and equipment. The current number of vehicles may have changed slightly since then, but it's the same ballpark. And the Fleet and Facilities Branch that maintains its fleet within OC Transpo does so in 4 garages. Next slide, please. The objectives of this audit were to review the city's fleet services functions, including fleet maintenance, life cycle maintenance, and fleet operations, and to provide council with reasonable assurance that the city's key fleet systems, practices, and procedures are operating with due regard for economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. The scope of the audit included the management and operation of fleet services in areas related to maintenance, inventory, warranty, material management, and capital projects, and OC Transpo processes related to maintenance and material management. We reviewed transactions from January 2019 until July 2020, so roughly a year and a half. The scope of the audit did not include compliance with legislation, policy, or other requirements set out by Fleet and OC Transpo, and as such, this was not a compliance audit. Next slide, please. Our findings for this audit consisted of those related to fleet services and those related to OC Transpo. Starting with fleet services, the audit found inconsistencies and limitations in lease versus buy assessments. Now, prior to entering into a lease agreement, a lease versus buy assessment must be performed by fleet services. This assessment is to determine whether or not buying or leasing would be more cost effective for the city. I would remind Audit Committee that the OAG recommended that these assessments be conducted in our 2018 review of the city's practices for the procurement of commercial vehicles. And our audit confirmed that they now are in fact being performed. While we found that the assessments were being completed by staff, there were inconsistencies and limitations in the way they were conducted and documented. For example, the savings achieved by deferring capital outlays through leasing were not quantified on the assessments. And these savings need to be taken into consideration in order to compare the true cost of leasing and the cost of purchasing in an accurate and comprehensive manner. We found that there was a limited capital budget for growth units. Growth units refer to a situation where a program needs a new vehicle to assess a new need, as opposed to replacing an existing vehicle. For growth units, client departments, for example, could be like parks, roads, or bylaw, are responsible for securing capital funding through a budget request, which is approved by council as part of the city budget process. If the department doesn't receive sufficient capital funds to purchase a new vehicle, they have to find other ways to meet their operational requirements. This includes using operational funds to lease the unit until the capital funding is approved. As a result, even when a lease versus buy assessment indicates that it should be less expensive for a city to buy a unit, they often are leased due to a lack of an available capital budget. And also for fleet services, we found that warranty claims were not submitted for all warrantyable jobs and parts. When the city buys new vehicles, they are generally included with, there's generally a warranty included. And there are times when cities' fleet garages will carry out work that is actually covered under a warranty. When this type of work is done, Fleet's warranty administrator is responsible for making the warranty claim and recovering the warranty amounts from the manufacturer. Our review of maintenance jobs between January 2019 and June 2020 found 295 work orders valued at close to $78,000 that were tagged as warranty jobs in the city's M5 fleet management system, but they had no warranty recovery against them. In addition, while the warranty parameters for each unit are flagged in the M5 system, not all jobs covered under warranty are flagged in M5. Those that are not flagged for warranty can only be identified through manual review. And given the volume of maintenance jobs done in the city garages and the fact that the warranty process is carried out by one warranty administrator, it is likely that many jobs that could be covered under warranty are being missed. Moving on to OC Transpo, we found limited monitoring and analysis of low usage units. While we did note that Fleet Services does have a report that identifies low usage units, OC Transpo, on the other hand, did not have a process in place to identify and monitor any non-revenue units with low usage. We identified that 42% of heavy units and 37% of light units had low usage using Fleet Services low usage criteria. These criteria are less than 10,000 kilometers a year for a light unit and 5,000 kilometers a year for a heavy unit. The percentage of units with low usage suggests that although usage is tracked, it is not being adequately monitored. For example, we identified a snow melter that was purchased in 2011 for $175,000 that was only used for 3 hours over the last 10 years. Monitoring and analysis of low usage units needs to be improved to ensure that units that are not being used as expected can be reallocated or disposed of in a timely manner. We also found insufficient controls over vendor invoice payments. We identified 7 invoices where the city paid more than the costs that had been negotiated in the standing offer. For example, we found that we were paying $150 an hour for some work versus 125 hours that had been that was a cost on the standing offer. OC Transpo identified additional overpayments to this same vendor, and the total overpayment was roughly $3,000. The city did spend time to set up this standing offer for these services in order to secure a better rate. It's just that the better rate isn't consistently being charged and paid, which can lead to increased costs for the city. And lastly, we found that existing monitoring may be insufficient to identify repetitive maintenance. Repetitive maintenance occurs where the same job is performed on the same unit on multiple occasions within a short period of time. This increases both maintenance cost and unit downtime. By using data analytics and sampling, we identified multiple instances of repeat maintenance which had not previously been identified by OC Transpo. Now, OC Transpo staff do monitor for repetitive maintenance, but we identified additional cases based on the reports that we ran using different parameters. Inadequate monitoring of repeat maintenance can lead to vendor quality issues, such as defective parts or poor workmanship not being identified. As mentioned, it can also lead to increased downtime and increased cost. We made 6 recommendations in the audit, and the city agreed with all of them. Next slide, please. At this point, I would just ask if there are any questions related to the audit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Auditor General. It's nice to see you again. There are some questions. Councillor Dudas, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. I very much appreciated this audit and reading through it, but I did notice that in the scope and objectives, there wasn't an examination of the sustainable development strategies that might be implemented. And I was curious as to why that was not included in this particular audit.
Chair, I think I can tackle that question. Unfortunately, I can't speak to why the scope was laid out the way it was, as it was done by my predecessor and a previous Deputy Auditor General that's no longer with us. We focused specifically on areas that we thought were of higher risk at that particular point in time, but you are correct in stating that we did not examine sustainable development strategies. As I believe you are likely aware, it is something that we put as a consideration for our 2022 audit plan, which is reviewing the city's status or progress with implementing sustainable development goals, as well as a current ongoing audit of the zero emissions buses project.
And I appreciate that. And actually, I do, Chair, I do have a motion that I did circulate. There's some small revisions. I'm happy to bring it. Well, actually, Councillor Kavanagh on my behalf will be bringing it forward. So if you wish to bring that up now, or I have a couple of other quick questions, whatever you prefer, I'm in your hands.
Why don't we let me ask Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Kavanagh, if you could introduce the motion, bring in the motion formally, and I will go back to Councillor Dudas to provide whatever context she wants, and then back to questions, just so that members of the committee are aware of the motion in all its aspects. So, Councillor Kavanagh, if you could.
Yep, thank you. I believe it got revised a little bit, but the clerk should have the new version. Thanks, Carol. So I'll read it for you. Whereas the audit of fleet services was included in the 2019 audit work plan of the Office of the Auditor General and was delivered today at committee, whereas the scope and objectives of the audit were related to procedures related to economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, but did not examine sustainable development strategies that might be implemented, whereas the city operates roughly 5,000 non-revenue vehicles, whereas the majority of North America auto manufacturers have made clear they are phasing out gas-powered vehicles, whereas the Government of Canada is legislatively phasing out the sale of new gas-powered vehicles by 2035, whereas the City of Ottawa has approved the Energy Evolution Plan, which includes the Green Fleet Plan as a project to continue the conversion of city vehicles to hybrid and electric vehicles, whereas the more prepared the city and the steadier the implementation of the plans, the lower and the more predictable the cost for the city, whereas it is imperative that these plans include achievable and realistic milestones as part of their project timelines, whereas regardless of one's personal beliefs on the necessity of such a transition, external factors will necessitate it, requiring the City of Ottawa to be prepared, whereas the Auditor General outlined within the emerging issues and audit horizon for 2022 section of her 2021 interim audit work plan, consideration for an audit on the city's progress on implementing sustainable development strategies. Therefore, be it resolved that the Auditor General consider including in her 2022-2023 audit work plan as part of the possible audit on the progress in implementing these sustainable development strategies, the city's progress in meeting its already established greenhouse gas emission targets.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Dudas, back to you with your questions, and if you want to provide any context on the motion that you've prepared.
Yes, thank you, and I very much appreciate that. And I wanted to thank the Chair as well as the Auditor General for their work on establishing the wording of this to really reflect the intent. I think it came very clear to me after reading the current audit that it's a matter of timing. At the time that this audit was done, it didn't take into account some of the changes, the external factors that are at play, which would be that the federal government is certainly pressing for this transition to electric vehicles, that auto manufacturers are already moving in that direction, and that the City of Ottawa itself has approved our Energy Evolution Plan, which includes the Green Fleet Plan. So my question, I suppose then to the Auditor General is, and I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that there is no direction here. This is merely a request. Does this complement what you had intended to do in terms of what you would look at? Will this help augment your determination of sustainable development strategies and the work that you intend to do? And can you support this motion?
Chair. Thank you very much, Councillor Dudas, for your motion and for your questions. Absolutely, I believe this aligns perfectly with what my team had intended for this particular audit. It does give us the flexibility that we need. We want to ensure that what we are putting on our audit plan is based off of what we identify as the key risks for the city and where we can add the most value. So yes, I do believe it aligns well with what our plans are to bring forward to audit committee later this fall as part of our 2022-2023 audit work plan.
Wonderful. I very much appreciate that. And I think the other aspect of that is that as we transition the city's fleet to hybrid or electric vehicles or whatever form this might take, there's money attached to that. And my question to the Auditor General is, at this point in time, without taking this motion into consideration or to looking at potentially incorporating this in the work that you're doing, do we have an established plan at the moment in terms of how we're going to pay for that transition?
Chair, I believe that question would be best directed to management. I'm not sure whether the city manager or if we have a representative from Fleet Services that would be positioned to answer that question.
Thank you. We have Yan St. Louis that is on the call. And just a note for everyone, I'm told that Jim Greer is not on the call, but Monsieur Nelson Gauvreau will be answering if there are any questions with respect to transit operations. Mr. St. Louis, did you want to provide an answer for Councillor Dudas?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we're still working on that plan right now. And as we mentioned last year during the budget cycle, we're planning to embed that transition as part of the day-to-day operation. So we're still putting the pieces in place, but we're working on that, yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. That, once again, I do hope that members of committee would be so kind as to support this motion. And I do appreciate the work that the chair and the Auditor General and took the time to assist me in drafting this. And I appreciate Councillor Kavanagh in tabling it on my behalf. I think it's important that we're proactive about this. We know it's coming. And I think that having a very in-depth insight into what this means for our organization in terms of our non-revenue fleet services is imperative. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas, and we'll be voting on that motion at the end of the item. Councillor El Chantieri, please, for questions for Mr. St. Louis, Mr. Greer, or the Auditor General.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will be talking about my colleague's motion after, but I have a few questions for the Deputy Auditor. In the past, we had a motion, I believe was from 2007, or maybe later, I'm not sure. Anyway, the motion was to make sure fleets in any departmental, they should bring it to FETCO. So let's see if the fire services wants additional fleet or any of the, they should come to FETCO. So the request should come to FETCO committee. And I know it was taking some kind of extra time, but did we stop that practice? Did we basically bypass it? So now each departmental can make their request to fleets, and fleet will have to, I guess, fulfill their request. Is that what's happening now?
Maybe we get some clarification, perhaps, from Fleet Services. But my understanding is that when there's an incremental vehicle that request goes through the budget cycle. If in the interim they need something quicker than that, they do the they want to lease. They do the lease versus buy analysis. It comes up, and if there's no budget there, then they go and they lease the vehicle. As if that's I believe that's my understanding on that. Maybe if you could confirm that. Yeah.
That is correct. Any growth goes forward as part of the budget cycle. So in the report that goes with the budget, information supplemental of the budget, any growth is identified in there, and that's where the money is requested. So it would go through FETCO and through budget.
So the departmental, Mr. St. Louis, cannot, through the chair, of course, not make the request directly to you. They will have to make the request to you and then comes to FEDCO for approval, or doesn't need to be approved by FEDCO?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. It would need to be approved by FEDCO through the budget process.
Okay, all right. Well, it's good to hear that practice is it. Again, my question to the Deputy Auditor General. When we talk about not follow the procurement process, how widespread this is, and how could we or management is going to be to deal with this? Like, I mean, if we have a standing offer with some, whether legal or KPMG or whoever, why we would not work with the standing offer? And who monitored this?
Well, it's difficult to say. I don't want to give the impression we found widespread cases here. I mean, we identified, in this case here, when we did our verification of invoices, we identified in this case here, there was one supplier where we were overpaying. So it's kind of two parts. The supplier is overcharging us, basically ignoring the standing offer rate, and then we're agreeing to pay it. So we came across that in one case. In this case, it was, I believe it was like $3,000, 3 or 7,000. But it wasn't a large amount of money, but it still was taking place. So again, we recommending that that be tightened up so that we make sure we are we are utilizing the standing offer rates that have been put in place.
Well, Mr. Minor, I'm a big fan of the auditor, and I've been from day one in big support of auditors and what they do for us. But I want to remove the sensationalism from it and get to, so how much did we pay in total, and what's the amount you think should not be paid? Like, I mean, if you say, oh, we spent $3 million to follow by the rules and only one invoice, I mean, still $1 to the taxpayer is $1, but I want to put it in a context. Can you put it in a context how much we paid out and how many bills were overcharged or mishandled?
Yeah, so again, in this case here, these were towing invoices. And so we looked at 8 of them, and 7 of them from one vendor had the price charged. The rate was higher. The total amount paid on towing charges, I would have to get back to you on that. I'm afraid I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I can provide that, and we'll provide the correct number so you can see what the total amount paid is in towing charges versus what we versus the ones that we identified where the wrong rate was paid.
And it's fair to say management agree to tighten that system or tighten that practice?
That's what they indicated in their management response. Again,
okay.
We'll see Transpo management could confirm, but I believe that to be the case.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Chair, my colleague's motion is great. It's great to have, but I find it is a little bit, it's a little bit of motherhood at this time, because we have not have a policy in place to give direction to fleet. We haven't talked about it as a budget. We haven't talked about that how much it's going to cost the taxpayer, and how are you going to do that cycle. So you have a life cycle. The next vehicle perhaps we need, and we saw that in the bylaw services and other, they go and they purchase that type of vehicle. But is this motion is a little bit ahead of, because we haven't established even the policy, we haven't even established the budget, we haven't even said how are you going to achieve this, and how much time is going to take the fleet and the city, depend on the budget, to be able to move forward. And I agree, yes, this is where most department and a lot of large city we're seeing moving toward the whether hybrid or electric. But I'm just wondering if management, not so much the auditor, will comment on this, is is management think is this motion is too soon? I mean, I don't mind voting for it because it's not going to mean much if the policy and the budget does not support the practice. So why would you want to have the auditor report say, oh, the city didn't give enough budget on this item? Anyway, I'm anxious to hear from management in the city about this motion. What does it mean?
Sure. Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiry. And if I could just, it is asking the Auditor General to consider including it as on the progress of implementation. The whereas it certainly does look forward to 2035 and the eventual. So hopefully management, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Mr. Saint-Louis in a moment, and perhaps Mr. Gauvreau, but we know about bus electrification. There's been quite a lot of talk about that from Mr. Saint-Louis with respect to perhaps will we be seeing some initiatives this fall budget or in upcoming budget cycles. And I see Ms. Turner has just turned on her camera. That might be an indicator that she'd like to weigh in. Welcome, Ms. Turner.
Thank you, Chair. And I can certainly start, and Mr. Saint-Louis can add some context. Fleet will be coming forward in Q2 of 2022 with a Green Fleet plan. And that plan will include not only the vehicle replacements, but looking at the changes necessary to the operating parameters, the charging infrastructure, upgrades to the grid. So our current strategy is to replace where possible traditional vehicles with hybrid or electric. But that comprehensive plan will be coming forward in Q2 because it's a lot more involved than simply swapping vehicles one for one.
Thank you, Ms. Turner.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Saint-Louis, you'd like to add something before I ask Valerie or Ms. Turner?
No, that covers it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Turner, through the chair, it's the motion from my colleague. I know there's no harm asking the Auditor General to, but I mean, in the absent, we have not done this policy and this. Like, I mean, I'm just wondering if it's the time should be extended for the audit of the fleet till at least to give you some time till the budget process took place. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I don't mind. I mean, I can say yes to this motion, but in practical, is this the practical way to do it?
So, Chair, we're able at this time to, with the vehicles that we have scheduled for replacement, to report the greenhouse gas reductions to the auditor. And if the auditor feels that it would be a worthwhile exercise, we absolutely could participate in that audit. Okay.
And I see the auditor have her hands up, so she must.
I just, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to compliment what Mrs. Turner mentioned, and also just to ensure, I know I met with most members of committee, but this fall, the audit plan that I will be bringing forward will be a 2-year audit plan, taking into consideration elections next year and the number of high-risk items that we've identified. So just to give you that context, it will be a longer-term audit plan. I do have it within my purview to do a longer audit plan than more than 1 year. So that helps give a little bit of context to know that if this information is coming out in Q2 as to how we go about scheduling that particular audit. So taking into consideration the start of the audit, and then by the time we go and report on that, we could very well be later into 2023 or 2024.
Well, okay, now I feel a little bit much better. So we're not putting, what they say, the cart before the horse. So I'm fine. Thanks to my colleague for the motion, but I'm glad that the Auditor General and the fleet are working together, and hopefully we can, achieve a good result. But I don't want to point our weakness on the fleet before at least we have a report what they are planning to do or how it's going to implement it. But anyway, I'm glad you're in agreement and move forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to my colleague bringing up that motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor El-Shantiry. Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Thank you, and thank you to Councillor Dudas for bringing this motion forward. I was happy to move it. It's moving forward. It's a good reminder that what the Auditor General does, we think of it in terms of cost and making sure that we're saving money, and there were some good examples in this report. But it's also about auditing our commitments, which is climate change. And so we will be going not a different way, because the costs are always important, but it's adding to what the Auditor General will be doing. So is that a good way to say it, Madame Auditor General?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I appreciate it, because that's what we're doing. In terms of the report that's in front of us, I appreciated it. The one that puzzled me was the snow melter, because it just seems odd to rent something for a little while. But apparently we didn't use it much, which surprised me. I think we all expected that it was going to be used quite a bit because another climate change item, actually, because we're looking at equipment that is specialized for freeze thaw, and that is coming more and more. It used to be just a couple times a winter, but now it's more often, and it causes havoc. I don't know if the fleet management wants to comment on the kinds of equipment that we have to have for the winter conditions.
Mr. St. Louis, did you want to, in the context of this audit,
Mr. Chair, just if I could offer the snow melter is actually part of the OC Transpo fleet. I don't know if the councillor wanted a specific answer with respect to that.
Sure, I think it deserves an explanation, because it's the one that's sort of outstanding in terms of cost.
Monsieur Gauvreau, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, so in terms of the snow melter, it was originally purchased back in, I believe, 2010 for our industrial garage. It was at the time there was a lack of parking space available at industrial garage, and there wasn't any contracts in place in terms of snow removal. So we did rent the snow melter for a very short term. It was a 4-month term, which was required by the company to rent. And then at that point was determined that the cost of the renting was very high. I believe it was $100,000 to rent it for 4 months. So the management at the time determined it $175,000 to outright purchase the snow melter was more cost effective. That being said, the rental price was removed from the original purchase of the snow melter, which was around $275,000 plus tax. So at the time, that was deemed a good decision on our part. Over those years, things have changed. The fleet composition has changed, and obviously some of our transitway with light rail have changed their dynamics as well. And it was determined at that time was to keep the snow melter as a backup. It's a very specialized piece of equipment. It's very hard to get a hold of, and obviously rental costs were very, very high. So it was decided to keep this as a backup. And at the time, if a contractor or any of our partners that we're using from standing offers were unavailable, we'd have this at our fingertips. So yeah, it was underutilized. However, it was always an essential part of our mitigation strategy for continuing operations during inclement weather.
Okay, but it was used just at the garages. It wasn't. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, yeah. So to clarify, it was used at the garages at the time. Was determined to keep it after the fact if it was required at the garage or a transitway. So the bus loops in particular were particularly susceptible to as a pinch point during inclement weather. So if there was an opportunity to use it at one of those areas, that's one of the strategies that we were putting in place. Thereby not losing that part of the transitway for like inclement weather, and if we didn't have an opportunity to have a contractor come in and clean it on a timely manner.
Okay, and we still have it or not?
We do. We currently still have it.
Okay. So now these are. I imagine this is going to come up with the different strategies we have to use for the weather. So I appreciate hearing the background to it, but I also appreciate the Auditor General looking into it and costing it out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. And I'm going to go to Councillor Vice Chair Meehan in just 30 seconds. But Mr. Gauvreau, just a quick supplemental question to Councillor Kavanaugh. Are there annual operating costs to the snow melter, even if it is just sitting there?
So yeah, currently there's not a lot of operating cost to it. We do it's forecasted for a 6-month inspection. So basically just to make sure it's in operating condition. There's very limited cost to maybe some labor costs associated to the inspection of the unit on a semi-annual basis.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Meehan, please.
I find this all extremely fascinating. Thank you, Chair. I guess my questions are a little bit more basic, I guess, and it goes to really the budget. When it comes to the money saved, whether we lease or we buy, or we do almost 300 jobs in the garage, jobs that should have been paid for by the warranty. We purchase a snow melter, even though it's only been used for 3 hours over 10 years. I have to question, where do we actually have the expertise and training on staff, to do the best calculations on whether it's better to purchase or lease? I mean, anybody who purchases a vehicle, you really drill down to figure out if you're getting the best deal, if you're going to lease or if you're going to buy. So I'm wondering, when we have a staff that seems to, they climb the ladder into a certain position, do we have the best heads to figure out if we're saving money, if this is actually the best decision that's going to save us money? Because every budget that we approve is based on the last year's budget. And the funding envelope can either stay the same or grow. But in fact, if we were to calculate the savings that could have been achieved here, if the right calculations had been made, warranties that weren't covered, not used, there's all kinds of findings in here that could have saved us a lot of money. So I would like to, and I feel bad asking this, but we have to know that we have the best expertise, the people who know how to do these calculations that are doing the job. And if, or somebody has to be, an extra set of eyes has to come in and say, yeah, that makes sense, or that doesn't make sense. And the fact that the city manager has approved these recommendations, who's going to oversee it to make sure that this work is done accurately and with savings in mind? Because 3%, we could add 3% to the fleet budget for next year, but maybe it's not needed if we save the money. So that's what I'm asking. Why were these things happening? This wouldn't be acceptable in the private sector. If decisions going to cost us a company money, and we are a company, I want to know why this is being allowed.
I presume that's for management, Monsieur St. Louis or Mr.
Yes, please. I want to know that we've got the best minds calculating or making decisions that are either going to save us money or cost us a lot of money. And we really don't see an amount. What did it cost us to have almost 300 jobs done in the garages that were covered by warranty? What did that cost us? I know as an owner of a car, I want to make sure my car is being repaired under warranty because I don't want to pay out of pocket. And here we are doing it almost 300 times.
Mr. Chair, there's other factors. There's various components coming into. If I look at the buy versus lease as a start, there's various components that we look into prior to deciding whether to buy or lease. In some cases, the cost of purchase was lower, but there's other benefits of leasing that outweigh the potential saving. For example, the immediate requirement, the immediate operational need, there's safety components, there's the length of the requirement, where it would be cheaper to buy over, if the requirement would be for 5 years, for example, the requirement's only for a year. So those factors also take into considerations. If we're looking at the warranty process, there's a lot of factor in there to consider as well. There's stuff there's items that are flagged as warranty items when you start a job on the floor. And when you look at it, the warranties are bumper to bumper in the system. But when you look at the item that needs to be replaced, it's a consumable. It's something that's not warranted. So it doesn't necessarily apply in every case. Yes, granted, we can improve our process. We agree to that, and we will look into this to make sure we can find efficiencies. But there's a lot more to consider in those decisions than just the financial aspect.
Okay. So like when it comes to the snow the snow melter, so we were paying $100,000 to rent it, I think, per month. I mean, the decision to purchase it then was the decision to purchase it after we knew that it was not going to be well used. I mean, and it's been sitting there for how long? I mean, at what point do we say, well, this has only been used 3 hours in the last 5 years. I think it's time to sell this thing. Who would make that decision?
So I'll answer that one if you like. So for that decision, you know, obviously the director, my boss, would be making the final decision on it. But the strategy has always been that in the unpredictable weather that we have, generally speaking, it might not be a bad backup plan to have. So in terms of usage, yeah, the usage is low, but for our for our immediate emergency situations that we have, in obviously with transit we have a lot of them. They're 24/7 operation. So if we end up losing either a yard because we can't deploy our transit operations to the fleet, or if we lose a transit way system. The thought was it was always better to have this in our back pocket, and if it was required, then we had it available to us. But overall, the discussions have been had over the years whether or not it was something we wanted to hold on to, but it was ultimately determined that it was something that was in an emergency situation was very beneficial for us to have. Yeah,
$275,000 sitting there. Sorry, as a resident, I can't imagine having a machine that expensive sitting and just waiting. What if? Okay. So I guess I go back to my question. Do we have the expertise at the top of staff to calculate everything that we need to save as much money as possible in the garages? Does somebody have the exact training that's required for this job?
So what I can say for OC Transport, I can't speak to Mr. St. Louis' group, is that we do have a very robust group of analysts that provide data to our director. We've built this team up over the last 5 years to, I think we started with 1 analyst. I think we're now up to 5 analysts to report back to the director and to make informed decisions. So do we have the team to support it? I do believe we do, yes.
Okay, we are transitioning to a green fleet, electric fleet, and this is a big change for, I guess, for the mechanics, for the garages. How are we going to ensure that people are absolutely, have the training that's necessary to deal? They're going to go from diesel to electric. How are we going to transition to that kind of expertise to make sure that the green fleet has exactly what it requires? They know batteries, they know the ins and outs of a green fleet, that they're not just learning on the job. How are we going to do that?
So I don't know, I can speak maybe first. Mr. St. Louis may have some to add. We are, obviously, everyone knows we're in the midst of onboarding a new electric bus. So fortunately, I've had some opportunities to participate with the manufacturer. We do weekly calls, and we've got a fairly well set up system with different working groups. We've also had management, myself included, participate in the training sessions for electric buses. So we are currently, we have 1 bus in Ottawa, and we're expecting 3 more in the coming weeks. Once they are here, we have a very diligent training program for our technicians. We've dedicated 1 hoist just for training and for the work on these electric buses. And we've involved the manufacturer in every step of the way. So the manufacturer has been participating in these conversations throughout the whole procurement of this process, and we'll be here on site in order to do the in-class portion of training and the on-the-floor portion of training. And we've designated specific technicians for these first 4 buses to make sure that they have all the training and PPE required. Obviously, there is quite a bit of training and protective equipment required for this.
Yeah, and so all the mechanics in all the garages will understand or are going to be trained. Will they be certified to deal with our electric fleet?
So for the first 4, not all mechanics will be certified. There will be a designated group of mechanics certified. However, there is still a lot of mechanical maintenance required to do on these buses. So the bus chassis itself is still a regular maintained vehicle. It has brakes, it has steering, and a suspension. So the skills for that portion are very transferable for a fleet technician. The specialized ones doing the electric work in the tubs and the generators, those are the ones that are going to receive all the training, with a transition to more people getting trained as we get more buses in service. So we have a very aggressive plan for, I believe, almost 500 buses in the next 4 to 5 years. So over the course of that period, we will be preparing the rest of the technicians to transition into that line of work.
And I guess new mechanics coming on, you'd want to know sure that they've gone to school to know the best way to handle electric bus?
Yeah, so the current standards for electric buses or any electric vehicles, there is not any real legislated. The ministries are working on different approaches for this. There is a legislative inspections, but there isn't any legislated certificate for electric buses. It's really just the certification for the electric portion of the bus. So it's not, I guess, not any. It's a little similar to what an electrician would do. However, I'm not entirely sure what the plan is going forward with the Ministry of Colleges and Trades for certification. But currently, right now, the requirement is for a 310T licensed mechanic to work on a transit bus, with the certification to work on the electrical portion of the bus.
And how many hours would that entail?
I believe it's 10 hours of training for the certification. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it's 10 hours of certification training.
Councillor Meehan, I think that's your
Is Fleet
5.
Services looking for?
Councillor Meehan, I think that's your 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. That'll be.
I'm happy to have you come back, though. Excellent line of questioning. I'd like to hear from the Auditor General so that she could remind us of the motion that was passed at Council with respect to her proactive approach on electric vehicles. Then I would like to hear, with respect to your questions, to Ms. Turner or Monsieur Saint Louis as to the expertise in other departments, because we heard from OC Transpo, and I see Councillor Kavanaugh's hand is up. So first, Madam Auditor General, did you want to just give us, just remind us all about the motion that was passed not that long ago, the month escapes me, with respect to electrification of the bus fleet and the work that you would like to enter upon on that?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair. We brought forward a motion in July, I believe it was early July, in order to add to our current audit work plan an audit of the zero emissions buses project. Currently, it is underway, and what we've decided to do with this particular audit is to take what we call an agile approach. So we are looking at very specific areas of risk throughout the project. We're currently starting off with our first phase, which I believe will be reported back either later this year or early next year, depending on our audit committee timing. And so you will be hearing from us likely multiple phases over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, I would say, on the progress of that particular project. Anything from how the pilot project is going, overall governance of the project, looking at agreements as management makes their way towards getting closer to signing of various agreements with Infrastructure Canada and the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And so very much looking forward to this project. Management's been extremely helpful so far and accommodating with a little bit of our change in approach from our typical audit. I hope that answers your question, Chair.
Thank you. It does. I appreciate the added information. And if I could go back with respect to the questions by the Vice Chair to Ms. Turner or Mr. Saint-Louis with respect to her question about the verifications and the oversight within the departments for fleet services on ensuring that we are calculating as robustly as possible.
Oui, merci, cher. Je vais demander à Monsieur Saint-Louis de répondre.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to OC Transpo, we have, with regards to the analysis and to make informed decision, we have a team of analysts here that look at all that information so we can make informed decisions. This is not something we take lightly. With regards to the training piece, again, we have a very similar process as OC Transpo, where we make sure as part of a procurement process, if there's new technology coming in, not just electric, but any type of other technology coming in, we'll make sure it's synchronized with training, that training is offered to our technicians, so we know what we can maintain and take care of that piece of equipment or that fleet.
Thank you, Mr. Saint-Louis and Vice Chair Meehan. I'll be happy to come back to you. Councillor Kavanagh, I see your hand up. Is that round two questions?
Yes, I wanted to ask about garages because there was 9 garages for the fleet services for the city and for OC Transpo. I wonder, in terms of the audit, was there any efficiencies of amalgamating or changing that, or I wondered if that was looked at in terms of how many we have and how efficient that is. And I expect things could change too with the new fleet coming with the electrification. But I just wanted to comment, was that looked at in terms of efficiencies?
I would say it wasn't a particular focus. The fleets are quite different. The bus fleets and the other fleets are really quite separate, and I can't say it became an issue. It wasn't raised to us or wasn't anything we focused on in particular. However, it was tough to see any immediate benefits from consolidation, given just how different the fleets are.
Okay, I just wondered if that was looked at since we're looking at the whole thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, I just have a quick question. Am I to, and I believe this is for Mr. Saint-Louis or Ms. Turner. So am I to understand that when Public Works needs an additional vehicle, that doesn't come through, I believe it's a Transportation Committee, and when bylaw needs a new vehicle to augment their fleet, that would not come through CPSC, that would come through FEDCO, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, ultimately, yes, that's correct. So if, let's say, bylaw wants a new vehicle, I'm assuming you're talking about growth. Obviously, they would have to justify the need for the vehicle. They would have to secure the funding through their own process, and the growth gets approved through the budget process. So it goes, when it's budget cycle, budget time, it's identified in our report that specific vehicle is requested as a growth by bylaw. And this is the money, this is how much it's going to cost, and it gets approved through the budget cycle, through FEDCO.
And just the fire department, same thing, which the budget is through CPSC, but growth, additional vehicles for growth, that would be through FEDCO.
Ultimately, it's all through the budget process.
It's all through the budget process, I understand. Which committee is responsible for approving that budget?
They all go through their own committee, depending who they report to, the different clients. That's part of them securing their funding, and it's all get amalgamated together through our report that goes through the budget once a year.
Okay. Okay. I'll follow up on that offline. Councillor Vice Chair in round 2.
Ding, round 2. I just want to follow up with Mr. St. Louis. You say you have a team of experts that are in charge of, figuring out what lease versus buy. The Auditor General finds inconsistencies, limitations in lease versus buy assessments. Warranty claims not submitted for warranties. Like this team of experts, I know the city manager is saying they agree with the recommendations. How is this team of experts going to be maybe look at different ways of doing their work, figuring out, calculating the best deal for the city? Because the Auditor General finds that they can tighten up their process. What's going to happen?
Absolutely, both processes are going to be reviewed. We're going to start, if we look at the lease versus buy, as the auditor indicated, that was raised, I believe it's 2018, that was identified as part of an audit on procurement. So that's something we've implemented since then. We've had our processes evolve. So that led to different templates being used. We're solidifying that template, and it's a question of documenting properly and keeping that information, that how the decisions were made. As I excuse me, as I mentioned previously, there's different factors, not only the financial factors being considered in there. It's a matter of documenting that properly. For the warranty piece, there's a lot in there that's being looked at as well. The warranty administrator, it's only one small part of a bigger process that starts at the technician level, that goes through the supervisor, and we'll review the entire thing. There's a lot of work in there. I can't speak too much about OC Transpo, but our fleet is so diversified, different make, model, years. We have access to dealership in town here, where a lot of time for warranty, we have to send them the vehicle so they do the work at no cost. So it shows no warranty, no recovery to warranty, when in fact the work was done at no cost. So it's not necessarily documented the same way. So these are all these aspects we need to document, we need to be more clear about. But yes, our process can be better to document that stuff and to review that stuff as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Who is this team of experts that you rely on?
We have a number of analysts. We have essentially people that look at that. We have the people that buy the vehicles.
Are these city employees, sir?
Yes, they are, Mr. Chair.
And they work in this area, or are they?
They do. They work in fleet services.
In top positions? Is that?
There's different level. As I mentioned, it's a team. It's a team effort, and we work with finance departments and client departments as well.
Okay. So do you agree that they've got to tighten up? Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Turner, I saw that you turned on your camera. Did you want to add anything, or are we good? Oh.
No, Chair, I would just appreciate that we can always do better, and we do.
Okay. Thank you. Having a little bit of internet. I think I'm still on. Okay. And so with respect to, if there are no other questions, with respect to Councillor Dudas's motion that was put forth on her behalf by Councillor Kavanagh, is that motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you. And with respect to that the audit committee received the report on fleet service audit and recommend that council consider and approve the audit recommendation, is that item carried?
Carried.
We are on to item number 3, Office of the Auditor General semi-annual report on follow-up procedures. Staff that are present with respect to that are, I believe, there's a variety of staff. And Ms. Gorenstein will be presenting. And please, Ms. Gorenstein, proceed when you're ready.
Carole, peux-tu s'il vous plaît partager la présentation? Merci beaucoup. Merci encore, Monsieur le Président et les membres du comité. Nous aimerions maintenant discuter notre rapport semestriel sur les procédures de suivi. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Encore une fois, mes collègues et moi souhaitons remercier le directeur municipal, la direction et le personnel de leur collaboration et leur aide constante avec les plusieurs changements qu'on a apportés au processus de suivi cette année. Encore, j'aimerais aussi remercier les membres de mon équipe pour leur appui avec tous les changements qu'on a faits. Je vais maintenant passer la parole à Madame Gornstein.
Thank you, Madam Auditor General. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Could I go to the next slide, please? As you may recall, the office updated the follow-up reporting process back in May of this year. Previously, we would perform follow-up procedures 2, 3, and sometimes 4 years after the initial audit and provide a formal report to Audit Committee on the management actions taken to address the recommendations from each individual audit report. The new process has us performing our follow-up procedures on recommendations as they come due across different audit reports. We then report on the results of this work semi-annually to the Audit Committee. This is the first semi-annual report being issued under this new process. Today, we will be highlighting 4 areas. First, to provide a status update on the recommendations issued since 2015. Second, the results of the follow-up procedures performed by our office since our last report in April. 3, to provide management's attested status on recommendations that have not yet been reviewed by our office. And 4, the key areas of risk that we would like to highlight to the committee. Next slide, please. In the follow-up of audit recommendations, our office's focus has been largely placed on recommendations issued in 2015 and onwards. This graph depicts the overall results for all 571 recommendations issued since 2015. The total includes recommendations that we have assessed in this report, in previous reports, and those yet to be assessed. The majority, being 55% of the recommendations, have been closed by our office. That means that our office assessed the completed actions and confirmed that these actions taken address the risks associated with the original observation. A further 44% of the recommendations have not yet been assessed by our office. And the final 1%, showing past due, represents 5 recommendations that the OAG has assessed as partially complete. Due to the higher level of remaining risk, the OAG has chosen to perform further follow-up work. Next slide, please. Since we last reported to the Audit Committee in April of 2021, our office has assessed a total of 53 recommendations across different audit reports. This graph depicts the results of our assessment. Of the 53 recommendations we reviewed, 50, or 95% of them, were closed as the identified risk has been sufficiently addressed. The remaining 3, or 5%, of the recommendations continue to be in an open status as further follow-up by our office has been determined to be warranted. Next slide, please. As shown in the first graph, 44%, or 254 of the recommendations issued since 2015 have not yet been followed up by our office. For these, the current chart depicts management's attestation as to the status of these recommendations as at June 30th of this year. It is important to note that these figures have not been audited by our office, but management is reporting that 61%, or 155 of the recommendations are completed, 20%, or 50 of the recommendations are past due, and 19%, or 49, are not yet due. Next slide, please. Since our last report to the Audit Committee in April of 2021, there are no significant risk areas that we believe warrant further attention of the Audit Committee. However, as a result of the additional pandemic-related priorities, the implementation of some recommendations have been delayed. This includes, for the corporate security audit, 7 out of 17 recommendations are past due. For the Public Works and Environmental Services Department contract management audit, all 7 recommendations are past due. And for the Stage 2 LRT project procurement, 4 out of 5 recommendations are past due. These items are being monitored by our office. In summary, based on the follow-up procedures performed by our office and management's attestation of their progress to date, we believe the overall progress since our last report to be acceptable. We will continue to assess the recommendations identified by management as complete in order to provide an ongoing picture of the status of outstanding recommendations and report to the audit committee in future semi-annual follow-up reports. Next slide, please. This concludes my presentation. We welcome any questions you have on the follow-up report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Gorenstein. And so we have Kevin Wiley, Anthony DeMonte from Emergency Protective Services, Will McDonald, I believe the Chief Procurement Officer, is on the call. If there are any questions, Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Auditor General. Quick question. Have you done assessment with other municipality of our size to see out of the best practice? Are we in line with the same, the same municipalities in Ontario or in Canada, to that matter? Like, I mean, where do we fit in your knowledge? Have we done any assessment of this nature?
Chair, thank you very much for your question, Councillor. We have not done any formal benchmarking. I can tell you from other discussions with whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal auditor generals, there is generally a theme across all levels of government that management tends to be a little behind with regards to implementing the recommendations and the action plans that they have established. So I think that's why in this particular case, we concluded that we feel that things are acceptable. The results that we're seeing are acceptable. Well, we'd obviously like to see 100%, and we'd rather not see any red whatsoever. Taking into consideration that we have been in the midst of a pandemic for the past 18 months, I'm very, very happy with the results that we're seeing. I'm also very impressed and happy with the collaboration that both my team and the city manager's office, as well as all the members of the senior leadership team, have been working through over the past few months with this new process. Really keeping these items top of mind, getting these quarterly updates is really helping us ask the right questions and really get an understanding as to why things are behind, and where possible, how can we help speed things up. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did, and I'm glad to hear from you your understanding. And obviously, we aim to have no red, and I think in hindsight, we all would love to see that. But reality is sometimes it might bring a little bit of challenge or different challenge. But I'm glad to hear, your regular meeting with management and follow up on it. That's helpful, so we don't have to wait for a year or two or after to say, can you please follow up what the result of that? So if you can, keep the committee informed of the follow-up you've done. Like you say, we did this about the fleet, and we follow up with 6 months or a year. I think to keep the committee engaged on a regular basis, and honestly, it helps sometimes to, I'm sure our city is part of other municipality when it comes to benchmarking. So it's good to know how we are doing, because sometimes, to be honest with you, different folks understand audit is differently. When in a small business or in a private business, we welcome the audit because it's going to make us look good, look stronger, look in different area, improve our productivity. That's how we used to look for the auditor. Sometimes in the municipal world, they look for the auditor, I got you moment. So somebody wants to, I'm glad to hear your regular meeting with the senior management has been productive. And as long as it is productive and you're happy with it, I think that should be shared with your committee, because as you report to this committee, we would like to see or hear from you more often on a follow-up, even if it's not due, but we can just volunteer to say, by the way, we did this and we have good result here, and we're still working on the outstanding items.
Chair, thank you very much for your feedback, Councillor. We can definitely take into consideration bringing forward even some informal feedback as to how things are progressing. But yes, I can definitely say that things have been working very well with management. And as you mentioned, I think most people see audit as a necessary evil, but I'm very happy to see that all members of management welcome my team and have been very cooperative.
Well, I thank you so much for your leadership and with your team, and thanks management for cooperation, because we're all, Steve Canelax always says it's one team, one city, or one city, one team. So thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, you're on mute.
Sorry, apologize. Thank you, Councillor El Shantiri. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you, Chair. Eli stole my question. I was going to ask about the comparison with municipalities as well, because it's we need to know what our benchmarks look like. So I appreciate you asked that question already. I was looking at it, and in terms of the pandemic, I wondered if that interfered very much, if that is a reason for any delays, because it's obviously a good reason. I think generally speaking, we're doing pretty good. It mentions the pandemic related priorities, but I just wondered if it caused further delays.
Chair, through our discussion with management, yes, it has caused delays, and obviously we felt that to be an acceptable reason. When it comes to shifting priorities in the city, there are some recommendations that are lower risk, and as such, we are comfortable seeing that as a response, but perhaps maybe the city manager would like to add to that.
Great. Is he here?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My computer in the middle of this meeting crashed, and it looks like it's done. So I'm on Steve Box's computer, so that's why you're seeing the name. And we had to scramble, so I missed part of the meeting. On this one, yes, as I've said before, the pandemic has had an impact on us, and I'm very happy that our Auditor General has acknowledged that. I mean, we've still made great efforts in moving forward the audit recommendations and implementing them, but we've had literally at our peak, we had thousands of staff redeployed from their current positions into public health, into emergency management, into our shelter system, into our respite centers. We also, and when the vaccination clinic started up, we moved a lot of people into that, into not only logistics, but actually in the centers. So a lot of our managers, a lot of people that work on these things, especially from our business support areas, were all redeployed to other parts of the city to deal with the top priority. And I've had these discussions with our AG, and I appreciate how understanding she is in terms of accommodating us while we get through this. We're still not out of it, but I think we've made significant progress. We still have some things outstanding, but we certainly, have taken this to heart from some previous audits over the last 4 or 5 years, and there is an increased focus on implementing the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Steve, and I appreciate it. I take it, though, that we're still on target, that these are delays. This doesn't mean that it's not, that issues aren't going to be fully resolved, and I realize it's not that many left. It's a small number, but we're still looking at getting them done in a timely fashion.
Oh, absolutely, and the new process that the Auditor General implemented, I think, is a real time saver, and allows us to focus, and yet allows her to ensure that we're compliant and we're implementing the recommendations. So I'm really pleased with how she's approached the audit follow-up recommendations. It's just saved a lot of work and allowed us to focus on actually implementing versus constantly reporting and revisiting and tracking percentages and all the rest. I think it's a great system that she brought. It's innovative and refreshing for all the staff, and we're all very appreciative.
Oh, could you just elaborate on what is the system so people can hear it? Is this a computerized system reporting system?
No, this is the new process that the Auditor General has implemented in terms of the frequency of reporting. And maybe Natalie, you want to expand again on what you're doing, so I don't speak for you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Chair, I guess perhaps just a quick refresher on the change in our process. So in the past, we would report on follow-ups that we had done. We perform our follow-up procedures 2, 3, and sometimes 4 years after an audit had been implemented. We then work with management to go over the findings that we've had and go through a reporting process. And when we had brought the changes to audit committee back in April, we had identified that one of the time savers for our office, but also for management, is that reporting phase. It is quite time consuming. And so we thought it would be easier if we decided to forego with an actual formal report for each specific follow-up that we do, and that we put our focus on reporting as a whole to the audit committee. This allowed us to report more frequently to the audit committee, as well as ensure that we have more time to do actual follow-up, because there were quite a few items that we needed to do follow-up on. So we're seeing a lot of time savings from that perspective, but it's also allowing us having these discussions with management on a quarterly basis, having their updates allows us to see what's tracking well, what's not, what could be the issues. We've had some great discussions over the summer on a couple of audits that we thought that they were actually quite behind on, but after clarifying what our expectations were, we realized they were right on target. So I think there's a lot of benefit coming out from this increased collaboration. And also, as Steve mentioned, I think we're saving both sides a lot of time.
Great. Sounds like great communication, and communication is the key. All right. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to go to the vice chair, and absolutely, I just want to amplify what was just said, the focus on high risk, high impact items. That's based on the severity, on the potential to escalate or to have other impacts on the value that we provide to the residents of the city. The focus on those recommendations, I think, is what I like to see. Vice Chair Meehan, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I'm so gratified to see a change in the system that is speeding up the reporting. You know that when I joined Audit Committee a couple of years ago, I was concerned with follow-up audits that were happening 4 or 5 years actually after the original audit, and I was worried that it was simply like if we didn't follow up faster, that things just sort of fall off the agenda, because time is time. It's you just kind of forget sometimes. So I'm so glad to see that the new system has been brought in and things are getting tightened up. And Madam Auditor General, I guess there's still a percentage though of recommendations that are past due. What would be the optimum amount of time for these to be addressed and for the cases to be closed?
Chair, I don't think there's a particular optimal time, because every recommendation has time constraints on them as to how long they take to implement, how many people are involved, how much collaboration across departments is required, or is there collaboration with the province, for example. So I think generally speaking, what we're focusing on is looking at the severity. What's the risk impact if they aren't addressed in a timely manner? And that's where our discussions are really focused with management. If we have a particular audit, as I mentioned, that we're seeing very little movement on, that's where our discussions are really focused on to ensure that we are continuing to see progress. And I think those discussions have been very fruitful.
Okay, so once the 20% that are still past due are dealt with, and with the new system in place, how long will, what's the biggest amount of time, or the greatest amount of time that we will see recommendations to be reviewed and follow up and closed? So I mean, I think Ottawa can be a model of efficiency when it comes to the audits. We got great staff. If they're pointed in a certain direction, that they can do this job, get fast. But so what would be the amount of time that you'd like to see from the time of an audit to the time that the recommendations are implemented?
Chair, again, I think the answer to that question is it depends. It depends on the context of that recommendation and what's involved in implementing the action plan that management's outlined. If we're talking about implementing a new system, that could take years. That being said, if we're talking about a change to a procedure, in most cases, we'd like to see that done within 6 months, but it depends what's involved in actioning that particular recommendation.
But do you see us having 50 recommendations or 20% outstanding after 3 years?
Again, it would depend on what our audits bring forward. My hopes is no, but if we have some very complex audits, sometimes that could be, you could have some items that are going to linger for a few years based off of their complexity. If our audit had, for example, recommended years back that you should consider grading your fleet, that's not an overnight action that's going to take place. That's going to take years, appropriate planning to implement into action. And so it depends what it is that we bring forward in our audits.
Okay. So I guess management stepped up, and I guess some of it, was just a reminder that these things had to be done, huh?
Absolutely. I think if I go back to a comment I made back in April, is keeping these things top of mind. We always focus on what our greatest priority is, what fire do we need to put out. And so I understand why, to a certain extent, some of these may have, for lack of a better word, fallen by the wayside because there were bigger fish to fry. And so having these continued discussions keeps things top of mind, and having a more efficient process, as the city manager mentioned earlier, allows them to spend time on actioning as opposed to on wordsmithing a report, for example.
Well, I want to thank you for putting in a system even I did not envision. I think you've done a great job. So thank you very much. And thank you to management for cooperating. And I wouldn't expect anything less, but thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm seeing no other questions. And so that the audit committee recommend council receive the report on the audit follow-up procedures. Is that item carried?
Carried.
Okay.
Carried. Thank you. Thank you all very much. And those are our 3 items. Thank you everyone for your thoughtful questions and your participation. Are there any in-camera items? Seeing none. Inquiries, notices of motion, other business. Seeing none, there is a media availability. Let's call it for 11:30. 11:30 media availability, please. And a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
So moved and so carried. Merci énormément à tout le monde. Have a safe day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ms.